Claude responded. I was on my third cup of coffee, still in my work boots from the early shift, when my daughter-in-law's name lit up my phone with a message that started with T. I was on my third cup of coffee, still in my work boots from the early shift, when my daughter-in-law's name lit up my phone with a message that started with the words attendance requirements, like it was a job application instead of a wedding invitation. Where are you watching from, friend? Drop your state or country below. I read every single comment, and it means more to me than you know that you're spending this time with me tonight. Just a quick note before we start. This story contains fictional elements crafted for reflection and entertainment. Any resemblance to real people is coincidental, but I promise you, everything it makes you feel is real. My name is Walter Doss. Most folks around here just call me Walt. I'm 63 years old, and for 35 years I drove a rig for Higgins Freight out of Ohio, hauling everything from lumber to refrigerated produce up and down I-75 in weather that would make most men quit by year 5. I retired last spring, not because my body gave out completely, but because my back finally sent me a message my brain had been ignoring for a decade. My wife, Carol, said it was time to let the young guys have the long hauls. I said I'd think about it. She sold my CB radio to a neighbor's kid the following week. That was the end of the discussion. We live in a small house on Birchwood Lane in Maysville, Ohio. The same house I bought the year our son Dean was born, back when the mortgage payment terrified me more than any icy overpass ever would. The porch needs new boards. I've been saying that since March. Tonight, none of it matters. Because tonight I need to tell you about an email and a wedding and a box I mailed that I never expected to hear about again until it ended up in the hands of 200 strangers in a ballroom in Columbus. It was a Tuesday evening. Carol was folding laundry on the couch, some home renovation show playing low on the television, and I was at the kitchen table with the newspaper, the way I like to end most days, when Carol's phone buzzed on the armrest. She glanced at it, then looked again, longer this time. "Walt," she said, "Dean sent us something." I looked up from the sports section. "What kind of something?" "An email. To both of us. It's got a subject line." She read it out loud, slow, like she wasn't sure she was reading it right. "Wedding attendance guidelines. Please review carefully." I set my coffee down. "Guidelines?" Carol opened it on her phone, and I watched her face change the way a sky changes before a storm. Not all at once, but in stages, the color draining out of her a little more, with every line she read. She didn't say anything for almost a full minute. Then she handed me the phone without a word, and I understood that whatever this was, she needed me to see it myself before she could talk about it. The email was from Dean, but I could tell right away it wasn't written the way my son writes. Dean's always been a man of few words, texts you 3 words back when you send him a paragraph. This email ran 4 pages, numbered, formatted, with headers. It read like something out of a corporate handbook, and at the top, in bold letters, it said, "In order to attend the wedding of Dean Doss and Vanessa Calloway, the following 22 guidelines must be observed by all immediate family members of the groom." 22. I read that number 3 times before it settled into my chest the way a bad diagnosis settles into a chest slow, and then all at once, undeniable. I want you to sit with me here a moment, because I think a lot of you know exactly what this feels like. You raise a boy for 18 years, you go without so he doesn't have to, and then one day, he sends you a numbered list telling you how to exist in his life, like you're an employee he's worried might embarrass the company at the annual gala. I scrolled down. Guideline 1. Immediate family of the groom would be seated at table 16 to accommodate photography sightlines for the bridal party. I've been to enough weddings in 63 years to know exactly what that means. Table 16 was the table nobody wanted a camera pointed at. Guideline 4 said that any conversation regarding the groom's upbringing, work history prior to his current position, or financial hardships experienced by the family was to be avoided entirely, out of respect for maintaining an elevated tone for the Calloway family's guests. I read that one twice. Dean works as an account manager now, wears a tie to the office, and somewhere between his old life and his new one, 35 years of me hauling freight through Ohio winters so he could have braces and a used truck at 16 had become something to be managed, something elevated away from. Guideline 7. No gifts, handmade or purchased secondhand, would be accepted at the reception. All gifts were to be monetary, submitted in a sealed envelope prior to the event, to streamline the gift table experience for photography purposes with a suggested minimum of $2,500. I want to tell you, friend, I have made things with my hands my whole life. Not furniture, not fine woodwork like some men do. I built engines back. I rebuilt the transmission on Dean's first car myself in our driveway the summer he turned 16. Laid on cardboard under that Chevy for 6 Saturdays straight while he held the flashlight and asked me 100 questions about torque converters he doesn't remember asking anymore. I had planned, before this email arrived, to restore an old pocket watch that belonged to my father and give it to Dean at the reception, polished, running true again after 40 years of silence, in a drawer. Guideline 7 told me that watch wasn't welcome in the room. Guideline 11 said that under no circumstances should the groom's father be introduced by his former occupation, and that if asked, family members should refer to Walter Doss as retired, with no further elaboration. I set the phone down on the table, face down, the way you set down something hot before it burns your palm. Carol was standing at the sink now, her back to me, her hands gripping the edge of the counter. "There's more," she said quietly. "Keep reading." I already did. I picked the phone back up because stopping felt like giving up on understanding my own son, and I wasn't ready to do that yet. Guideline 14 said alcohol consumption for the groom's immediate family should be limited to 1 beverage over the course of the evening. In the interest of maintaining decorum consistent with the Calloway family's standards, I have had exactly 1 drink at a wedding in my entire life, at my own, and it was champagne Carol's father poured for me because he insisted. Guideline 16 said there should be no crying, no raised voices, and no emotional displays during the ceremony or reception, as it might create discomfort for guests unfamiliar with the family's demeanor. And then, Guideline 19. I'll read you the exact words, because I've had them memorized since that Tuesday, and I suspect I'll have them memorized until the day I die. The groom's parents will not be photographed with the couple during the formal photography session, as the photographer's schedule does not permit additional configurations beyond the immediate wedding party and the Calloway family. We wouldn't be in a single photograph, 35 years of raising that boy, and there wasn't room in the schedule for 1 picture. I put the phone down again, and this time I left it face down and didn't pick it back up. Carol turned from the sink, dried her hands on a dish towel that didn't need drying, and came and sat across from me. Her eyes were red, but she wasn't crying. Not yet. Carol doesn't cry easy. Never has. 22 conditions, she said, to watch our own son get married. I counted 22 too, I said. What are you going to do? I sat with that question a long while. Long enough that the coffee in my cup went from hot to lukewarm to cold, and I never noticed the difference. I don't rightly know yet, I told her. But I know we're not arguing with a list. A man who sends his parents a numbered document instead of picking up a phone isn't looking for a conversation. He's looking for compliance. So we don't go? I didn't say that either. That night I didn't sleep much. I lay in the dark running numbers in my head. Not the numbers on Dean's list, but older ones. The year I took on weekend runs so he could go to that basketball camp in Michigan. The year Carol picked up extra shifts at the diner so he could have a laptop for college applications. The year I sold my father's old truck, not the pocket watch, the truck, the one thing of my dad's I had left, besides that watch, because Dean needed first and last month's rent for his first apartment and was too proud to ask me directly, so he'd mentioned it to Carol instead, the way boys do when they want help but don't want to owe anybody for it. Around 2 in the morning, I gave up on sleep and went out to the garage. That's where I keep my father's old roll-top desk, the one thing of his besides the watch I never sold. I don't rightly know why I went out there that night. Maybe I just wanted to be near something that had outlasted more than 1 generation of quiet sacrifice. I opened the bottom drawer looking for a rag to wipe down the pocket watch. The watch. I now had no wedding to give it at, and that's when my hand hit something that didn't belong. A shoebox, pushed to the back, taped shut, with Carol's handwriting on the lid. 3 words. Dean's Fund Don't. I sat down right there on the cold garage floor with that box in my lap. And I want you to understand, I am not a man who goes through his wife's things. 39 years of marriage, and I have never once opened a drawer or a box that wasn't offered to me first. But something about those two words, Dean's Fund, made my hands move before my mind agreed to it. Inside were receipts. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds, going back years, some so faded I had to hold them up to the bare bulb overhead to read the numbers. And beneath the receipts, a spiral notebook, half the pages filled in Carol's careful cursive, the same handwriting she used to write grocery lists in for 20 years. I read the first entry, March 2004. Skipped my dental cleaning, put the $80 toward Dean's cleats, told Walt the dentist rescheduled. He believed me. NS. My chest did something I don't have good words for. I turned the page. August 2007. Sold Grandma's wedding ring to the pawn shop on Route 9. Got $210. Added it to the fund for Dean's SAT prep course. Walt thinks I still have the ring in the cedar box. I can't tell him. He'd feel it as a debt. And it was never a debt. It was a choice. I turned another page. January 2011. Walt took the overnight loads again this winter, 3rd year in a row, so Dean could have a car for his senior year that wouldn't embarrass him in front of his friends. I never told Walt what those overnight loads do to a man's back over time. I watched him get older 3 winters in a row, and I let him think it was just weather and age. It was Dean. It was always for Dean. I sat on that garage floor for I don't know how long. The furnace clicked on somewhere behind the wall. A car passed on Birchwood Lane, headlights sweeping across the garage window and gone again. I turned to the last written page. Carol had drawn a line beneath the final entry, the way she draws a line under a finished list, and beneath that line, in bigger letters than the rest, she'd written, total, 19 years, $31,400. This isn't a debt Dean owes. I'm not writing this so it gets paid back. I'm writing it so that someday, if anyone ever wonders whether this family loved that boy enough, there's proof. Walt, if you ever find this, I'm sorry I didn't tell you. You'd have tried to stop me, and I couldn't let anyone stop me. Not even you. I did not cry. And I want to be honest with you about that, the way I've been honest about everything else tonight. My eyes burned something fierce, and I pressed the back of my hand against my mouth hard enough to leave a mark. But I did not cry. What I did was sit there until the kitchen light clicked on through the connecting door, Carol up and starting the coffee, same as every morning of our marriage. Unaware that I now knew exactly what she'd carried alone for 19 years, I closed the notebook. I put the receipts back in order, oldest on the bottom the way I'd found them. And somewhere in that garage, at 3 in the morning, sitting on cold concrete with my father's roll-top desk at my back, I decided what the gift was going to be. We did not argue with Dean's list. We did not call him to negotiate. Carol wanted to at first. She wanted to pick up the phone and ask him, mother to son, whether he understood what he'd written, whether he'd read his own words back to himself even once before he hit send. I asked her not to. Some things, once explained, lose the ability to explain themselves. I wanted this one to speak for itself, in its own time, in its own room. We RSVP'd yes. We followed every guideline to the letter, not because we agreed with a single one of them, but because I've learned something in 63 years. The loudest way to make a point is sometimes to comply so completely that the unfairness of what you're complying with becomes impossible for anyone else in the room to ignore. I did not bring the pocket watch. There was, after all, a guideline against handmade or sentimental gifts, and while a pocket watch isn't handmade, I decided I would honor the spirit of Dean's rules rather than the letter, because I had something else in mind entirely. Instead, 3 weeks before the wedding, I drove into Columbus myself and had a woodworker I know, old Frank DeLillo, who owes me a favor from a transmission job 20 years back, build me a plain cedar box, no carving, no inscription, nothing that would draw an eye across a room, just a box. The kind you'd mistake for holding cufflinks or old photographs. Inside it, I placed 3 things. Carol's spiral notebook, exactly as I'd found it. A short note in my own plain handwriting. 6 lines, nothing more. And the pocket watch, after all, not for Dean to wear, but for Dean to hold, because I decided a man should have something of his grandfather's in his hand on the day he becomes a husband, regardless of what number appeared on any list. I shipped the box to the reception venue directly, addressed to the gift table, care of the wedding coordinator, time to arrive the morning of the wedding, along with everything else. I told no one what was inside, not even Carol, until the morning we drove to Columbus, when I finally told her what I'd found in the garage and what I'd done with it. She didn't speak for a long while after I told her. Then she reached over and took my hand off the gearshift and held it the rest of the drive. The venue was a restored old ballroom downtown, the kind with high windows and a chandelier that probably cost more than my first house. 200 guests, easy, dressed the way people dress when they want photographs to prove they were somewhere important. We found table 16 exactly where the guideline promised, tucked near the service hallway, close enough to the kitchen that I could smell garlic and hear the clatter of trays before the appetizers even came out. Our neighbors of 18 years, Harold and Ruth Ann Beckett, were seated with us. Dean had at least extended the invitation to the two people who'd watched him grow up 2 doors down, even if he'd assigned them the same table as his own parents. Harold shook my hand as we sat. "View's not bad from back here," he said, trying to make it light. "You can see the whole room." I could see the whole room, and about 20 minutes in, I saw a young man in a slate-gray suit lean toward another groomsman and nod toward table 16, saying something behind his hand. The other groomsman laughed, quick and quiet, the kind of laugh a person tries to swallow before it fully escapes. Carol's hand found mine under the tablecloth and gripped it once, hard. "Let it be," I said, quiet, mostly to myself. The ceremony went the way ceremonies go, a string quartet, vows about commitment and partnership. Dean standing at the front in a suit that fit him better than any suit I'd ever owned, looking, for just a moment, when his eyes swept the room and landed on table 16, like a stranger I used to know very well. He looked away fast. Carol squeezed my hand again. Vanessa came down the aisle on her father's arm, and I'll say honestly, she looked lovely, the way brides generally do, and her father, Richard Calloway, walked beside her with the particular comfortable posture of a man who has never once doubted his own place in a room. The reception moved along the way receptions do. Dinner, toasts, the first dance. Then the gift table, situated near the head table, began to draw attention the way gift tables do the MC, a smooth-voiced man in his 50s, narrating each item as it was carried up. A crystal serving set from an aunt. A framed photograph collage from the bridesmaids. Applause after each one. Photographs after each round of applause. Then, a server lifted the plain cedar box. I felt Harold shift in his seat beside me. Under the table, Carol's knee pressed against mine. The server carried it to the head table and set it down in front of Dean and Vanessa. I watched my son look at that box for the first time up close, plain cedar, no carving, nothing remarkable, and for a moment I don't think he recognized it at all, because I deliberately made sure it looked like nothing special. Vanessa glanced at the small card taped to the lid, read the names Walter and Carol Doss out loud to the room, and the MC smiled and said, "From the groom's parents," and the room offered its polite, appropriate applause. Dean reached for the clasp. Vanessa said something to him low, her hand briefly on his wrist, something about maybe opening gifts from the groom's side privately, later. But Dean had already lifted the lid. On top sat my note. 6 lines, folded once, my plain handwriting. He picked it up, unfolded it, read it in silence, and I watched his shoulders change while he read a small drop, like a man setting down a weight he hadn't realized he was carrying since he walked into that ballroom. He set the note aside without reading it to the room. Then he lifted the spiral notebook out of the box, and I watched him turn it over once in his hands, confused, before recognition hit him. The way recognition hits a man who has seen an object 1,000 times without ever truly seeing it. "What is that?" Vanessa asked, her voice controlled but with an edge creeping into it now. The edge of a woman watching an element enter a room she thought she'd accounted for completely. "It's my mother's," Dean said. His voice didn't carry far, but the room had gone quiet enough by then that it didn't need to. Richard Calloway rose from his seat at the head table with the particular ease of a man who has spent 40 years believing every room eventually becomes his, to narrate. He stepped up beside his new son-in-law, "May I?" he said, already reaching, already opening the cover before anyone answered him. He read the first line to himself. Then, because he was a man accustomed to filling silence with his own voice, he read it out loud, without fully deciding to. "March 2004, he said, his voice carrying easily to the nearest tables. "Skip my dental cleaning. Put the $80 toward Dean's cleats," told Walt the dentist, rescheduled. He believed me. The table nearest the head table went still. Richard turned the page. August 2007. Sold Grandma's wedding ring to the pawn shop on Route 9. Got $210. Added it to the fund for Dean's SAT prep course. Someone at the Calloway family's table made a small sound, quickly swallowed. Richard's voice had changed by the third entry, the performing quality dropping out of it, replaced by something quieter, more private, the voice of a man reading something he hadn't expected to move him. January 2011, he read. Walt took the overnight loads again this winter, third year in a row, so Dean could have a car for his senior year that wouldn't embarrass him in front of his friends. I never told Walt what those overnight loads do to a man's back over time. Vanessa's hand tightened on Dean's arm. "Dad," she said, low and urgent. "That's enough. Put it down." Richard did not put it down. He turned to the final page, the one with the line drawn beneath it, and read it in a voice that had lost every bit of its dinner party polish. Total, 19 years, $31,400, he read. He stopped. His chest rose and fell once, visibly, from across the room. "This isn't a debt Dean owes. I'm not writing this so it gets paid back. I'm writing it so that someday, if anyone ever wonders whether this family loved that boy enough, there's proof." The room did not react right away. It absorbed the way a room absorbs something too large to respond to immediately. Then Richard closed the notebook slowly and looked at Dean, not with anger, and not performing for the room anymore either, but with the look of a man recalculating something he'd assumed was settled and finding the original math entirely wrong. Dean's face had gone the color of the tablecloths. "Excuse me," a voice said from the left side of the room. "Table 16. Harold Beckett pushed his chair back and stood. He was a broad man, built from decades on construction crews before he retired, and the simple act of him rising drew every eye without effort. "My name is Harold Beckett," he said, and he didn't need a microphone. He'd spent 30 years making himself heard over jackhammers. "I've lived next door to Walt and Carol Doss for 18 years. I'd like to say something, if nobody minds." Nobody minded. "I watched Walt take overnight freight, runs 3 winters straight, so his son could have a car that wouldn't embarrass him," Harold said. "I watched Carol work extra shifts at the diner some semesters, so Dean could have what his friends had. And 2 hours ago, I watched 2 young men at that head table laugh when Walt walked into this room." Harold's voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. "I'm not saying this to embarrass anybody. I'm saying it because that man at table 16 has been quiet a long time, and the people who benefited from his quiet ought to know exactly what it cost him." Harold sat back down. The room rearranged itself around what he'd said, the particular resettling that happens when people realize the shape of a room isn't what they thought it was 5 minutes earlier. Ruth Ann stood next, quieter than her husband, but just as steady. "My husband and I have known that boy since he was 6 years old," she said, looking not at Dean, but deliberately at the groomsman in the slate-gray suit who'd laughed earlier and had been shrinking in his chair ever since Harold stood. "I know you too, Marcus. You used to sit on our porch steps telling Dean his father's job was something to be embarrassed by. I heard you say it more than once. Funny thing about porches, you hear everything, and you don't forget any of it." Marcus opened his mouth. Nothing came out of it that mattered. Vanessa's mother, Diane Calloway, had risen from her seat by then, walked to the head table, and lifted the notebook gently from where Richard had set it down. She read the final page again herself, lips moving slightly, the way a person reads something they need to be certain they understood correctly the first time. Then she looked at her daughter. "Did you know about this notebook?" she asked. Her voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. "Mother, this isn't the time. I'm asking you a question at your own wedding," Diane said. "I would like an answer. Did you know Carol Doss had been setting money aside for Dean for 19 years? That has nothing to do with the guidelines. Vanessa said, and the crack in her composure was small, but it was there. Walt Doss fell off a roof fixing something at your future house, didn't he? Diane said. It wasn't really a question, because the contractor estimate was too high, and you put him at table 16. He offered to do that himself, Vanessa said. Nobody asked him to. I asked him, Dean said quietly, from where he stood at the head table, the notebook now back in his own hands. It was the first thing he'd said in several minutes. I mentioned the estimate was high. I didn't ask him directly. I just mentioned it, the way you mention something when you don't want to owe anybody but you also don't want to pay for it yourself. His throat moved. He heard me anyway. He always hears me anyway. Richard Calloway turned to his new son-in-law, and whatever ease had been in his voice all evening was entirely gone now. Tell me something honest, he said. When you assigned your own parents to table 16, what was your thinking? Dean looked down at the notebook in his hands for a long moment. It was the table that made the seating chart work, he said. The words came out rehearsed, and I could see him hear himself say them, see the small flinch of recognition that follows a man realizing he doesn't believe his own sentence. Is that what you want to stand behind tonight? Richard asked. Dean didn't answer that. Instead, he looked across the ballroom, past the head table, past the Calloway family's table, all the way to table 16, where I was sitting with Carol's hand still in mine. He set the notebook down. He walked across that ballroom floor in front of 200 guests, past every table that had assumed my wife and I belonged near the kitchen, and he knelt down beside my chair the way he used to kneel beside the Chevy in our driveway, waiting for me to hand him a tool. Dad, he said. I read Guideline 11 again in my head about 10 times since Richard opened that box. I told everyone to call you retired. Just retired. Like there wasn't a word before it. His voice broke on the next part. You drove trucks through Ohio winters for 35 years so I could have a life where I never had to. And I made you erase it for one night so I wouldn't have to explain where I came from to people whose good opinion I wanted more than I wanted yours. I didn't say anything right away. I've spent a lot of years learning that silence, held at the right moment, says more than most sentences a man can construct on short notice. I'm sorry, Dean said. I'm sorry about the table. I'm sorry about the guidelines. I'm sorry it took my mother's handwriting read out loud by a stranger for me to understand what the two of you actually gave up so I could stand here tonight in a suit that cost more than your first truck. Carol was crying by then, quietly, the way she cries, which is to say almost invisibly, a hand pressed against her mouth. I stood up, slow, my knee reminding me the way it always does these days, and I put my hand on my son's shoulder. You were embarrassed, I said. I understand embarrassed. I was a 19-year-old kid once too, ashamed of things I had no business being ashamed of. It passes, mostly. Sometimes it takes a room full of strangers to help it pass faster than it would on its own. I reached into my jacket pocket and took out the pocket watch, my father's watch, the one I'd almost given him privately weeks ago before I decided the notebook needed to travel alone. This was your great-grandfather's, I said, and I put it in his hand, closed his fingers around it myself. I was going to give it to you quiet, at home, some other time. I think tonight's better. I think tonight it means something it wouldn't have meant in the kitchen on Birchwood Lane. Dean held that watch like it weighed more than metal and glass, which I suppose, by then, it did. We didn't finish the night at table 16. Vanessa, to her credit, and I'll give a person their credit when they've earned it, even mid-mistake, asked the coordinator to have 2 chairs added at the head table before the cake was cut, and she came over herself and asked Carol, not Dean, if she and I would sit up front for the rest of the evening. Carol looked at me first. I nodded. We went. I'll tell you something I've come to believe in. 63 years on this earth, and it's the same thing I'd tell any of you watching tonight, who've ever felt yourselves quietly erased by the very people you spent your whole life building a future for. The people who love you loudest are rarely the ones who say so the most. Sometimes they're the ones who sell a wedding ring at a pawn shop on Route 9 and never mention it. Sometimes they're the ones who take one more winter of overnight freight runs and call it nothing but weather. Don't wait 19 years, like I nearly did, to find out what your own family gave up for you in silence. Ask, look, notice, before somebody has to read it out loud in a ballroom for you to finally see it. This wasn't a story about revenge, Not really. Whatever the title of tonight's video might have promised you, it was never about punishing my son. It was about a plain cedar box that had no business drawing anyone's eye, carrying inside it the truest thing either of us had to give the proof that we loved that boy long before he understood what love had cost us, and that we'd go right on loving him after, guidelines or no guidelines, table 16 or the head table. It never once made a difference to us at all. If tonight's story found you, maybe it found you for a reason. If something in it sat with you the way it sat with me, tell me where you're watching from down in the comments. Share it with somebody who needs to hear it tonight. And if you'd like to walk through more evenings like this one with me, stick around, subscribe, so you don't miss the next one. Thank you for staying with me clear to the end. It means more than you know. Claude responded. Sometimes the people who love us the most are the quietest about it. They don't announce the sacrifice. They just make it and move on, trusting that love does. Sometimes the people who love us the most are the quietest about it. They don't announce the sacrifice. They just make it and move on, trusting that love doesn't need a witness. So take a real look at the people around your own table tonight. Notice what's never been said out loud. Say thank you before a stranger has to read it to you first. A small note for you. This story was crafted and fictionalized by AI purely for your entertainment, though we hope its heart carries a genuine, positive lesson home with you.